Gestapo searched her bakery 12 times, not knowing that under the oven were 60 children. Marta Keller. October 17, 1943, 5:45 a.m., Rue des Rosiers, Paris, France. Hauptsturmführer Ernst Weber pushed open the door of the Keller bakery with the confidence of a man who had carried out this operation 100 times before. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the morning air, an obscene sensory indulgence in a starving city. Behind him, 4 Gestapo agents waited for orders. 12th inspection, Weber announced in French with a heavy German accent. Flour records, ration coupons, employee documents. Marta Keller, 43, standing behind the counter in an apron dusted with flour, nodded with the resignation of someone who had learned that visible resistance only made things worse. Of course, Herr Hauptsturmführer, everything is in order. Weber smiled with contempt. This bakery irritated him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. It produced too much bread for its size. It drew too many customers for its location. And the baker was far too calm when the Nazis appeared without warning. Something was wrong. It had always been wrong. In 11 previous inspections, he had never found concrete evidence. But his instinct, sharpened by years of hunting resistors, told him this woman was hiding something. What Weber didn't know, what 12 exhaustive inspections would never reveal, was that directly beneath his boots, separated only by the refractory bricks of a working bakery oven, there was a bunker that at that exact moment held 17 Jewish children between the ages of 3 and 14. Motionless, silent, breathing air filtered through ventilation ducts disguised as the oven's steam outlets. And those 17 children were only the current occupants. By October 1943, the bunker beneath the Keller bakery had sheltered, fed, and ultimately evacuated more than 60 Jewish children whose families had been deported to Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Drancy. This is the story of how a widowed baker turned her family business into the most effective child rescue operation in occupied Paris. How the heat of a commercial oven created the perfect cover for underground life. And how the bread that fed Nazi collaborators financed the salvation of the children those same Nazis wanted dead. The bakery before the occupation. The Keller bakery had operated on Rue des Rosiers since 1893, founded by Marta's grandfather, Heinrich Keller, an immigrant from Germany who had mastered the art of Alsatian baking. By 1940, it was an institution in the Marais Jewish quarter. Perfect baguettes, challah on Fridays, pastries that made German exiles weep with nostalgia. Marta had inherited the business in 1938 when her husband, David Keller, died of tuberculosis at 41. It was a brutal transition. A woman alone running a physically demanding business in a society that assumed widows would either remarry or collapse. Marta did neither. She hired 2 assistant bakers, learned every aspect of the business David had handled, and worked 16-hour days kneading, baking, selling. By 1940, the bakery was more successful than ever. Her only daughter, Sophie, 19, worked as the shop assistant. Together, they ran the front while the bakers worked in back. It was an efficient, profitable, respected operation. When the Germans occupied Paris on June 14, 1940, the Marais changed immediately. It was the heart of Jewish Paris. Synagogues, kosher businesses, religious schools. The Nazis identified it at once as a top priority target. The first measures were subtle: registration of Jews, restricted hours, bans from certain professions. Marta, technically not Jewish under Nazi racial laws, her family was German Catholic, could continue operating legally. But her customers, predominantly Jewish, faced increasingly severe restrictions. In September 1940, the occupation authorities implemented a strict rationing system. Each family received monthly coupons for bread, meat, dairy. The quantities were brutally inadequate. 250 grams of bread per day per adult, 350 per child. Hunger calculated as a tool of control. Bakeries received flour allocations corresponding exactly to the coupons they were required to redeem. In theory, it was impossible to produce extra bread. In practice, Marta quickly discovered the system had exploitable cracks. Her first illegality was small. When a Jewish customer arrived without enough coupons, she discreetly slipped extra bread into the bag without charging. Then she began buying flour on the black market using profits from wealthy customers who paid inflated prices. Small transgressions that gradually built a network of passive resistance. By early 1942, Marta was effectively running two bakeries, a legal one that served collaborators, German officers, and Parisians with proper coupons, and an illegal one that fed Jews, resistors, and desperate families with no resources. It was financially unsustainable. Black market flour cost 3 times the official price. Marta burned through her savings quickly. But every time she considered stopping, she remembered the faces of hungry children, frantic mothers, families falling apart under Nazi pressure. So she kept baking. The first girl, July 12, 1942. The Rafle du WWII, the WWII roundup. In a massive operation, French police arrested 13,152 Jews in Paris over 2 days. Entire families were torn from their apartments, transported to the winter velodrome, then deported to transit camps and eventually to Auschwitz. The Marais was devastated. Streets that once echoed with Yiddish and children's laughter fell silent. Windows empty, staring out like blind eyes. Marta watched from her bakery as families she had known for decades were loaded onto buses. She saw the Goldsteins arrested, parents, 3 children. She saw the Rosenbaums, her best customers, shoved. Violently. She saw dozens of children crying, confused, terrified. And she did nothing. Because what could she do? A baker against the entire machinery of Nazi occupation. 3 days later, on the night of July 15th, someone knocked softly at the bakery's back door after Marta had closed. She opened cautiously. A Jewish woman she vaguely recognized, a neighbor from 2 streets east, was holding a little girl of about 5. "Please," the woman whispered. "My husband was arrested in the roundup. I should have been arrested too, but I wasn't home. I heard a second raid is coming. I can't protect my daughter. Please, just for one night until I find somewhere safe." Marta looked at the child, huge eyes, pale face, clutching a rag doll. She looked at the mother, who clearly hadn't slept in days. "Come in," Marta said, the decision made in a second. The mother stepped inside and explained quickly. Her name was Rachel Levy. Her daughter was Sarah, 5. Rachel had obtained false papers for herself and planned to flee south to the unoccupied zone. But traveling with a small child was too dangerous. She needed someone to hide Sarah temporarily. "How long?" Marta asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I swear I'll come back." Marta knew it was a lie, not a malicious lie. Just the lie of a desperate mother promising the impossible. The odds that Rachel would survive the journey south, build a safe life, and return for her daughter were microscopic. "Leave her," Marta said at last. "When you can come back, come back." Rachel cried, kissed Sarah fiercely, whispered promises they both knew she likely wouldn't keep, then disappeared into the night. Sarah stood in the bakery kitchen, still clutching her doll, staring at Marta in absolute terror. "Are you hungry?" Marta asked gently. Sarah gave the tiniest nod. Marta gave her bread with butter and milk that had cost a fortune on the black market. Sarah ate mechanically. No pleasure, only the need to survive. That night, Sarah slept on the living room sofa upstairs above the bakery. Marta didn't sleep at all, her mind processing the implications. She had crossed the line from passive help to active concealment. If the Nazis discovered a Jewish child in her apartment, execution was likely, for her and for Sophie. The next morning, Sophie found Sarah sitting stiffly on the sofa. "Mom," Sophie said calmly. "Who is she?" "Sarah. She's going to stay with us for a while." Sophie, 19 but hardened by 2 years of occupation, understood immediately. "How long?" "I don't know." "And if the Gestapo comes?" Marta had no answer. For the next 3 days, Sarah stayed in the apartment, never making a sound, moving like a ghost. She was unnervingly quiet, having learned at an impossibly early age that visibility meant danger. On July 18th, Marta received a second nighttime visit. Different woman, same terror. 2 children this time. Brothers, 7 and 9, whose parents had been deported. Could Marta hide them, just temporarily? Marta said yes before her rational mind could object. By the end of July, she had 5 children hidden in her 2-room apartment. It was completely unsustainable. Children inevitably made noise. Neighbors asked questions. Marta invented stories, evacuated nephews, the children of refugee friends. The stories were obviously false, but sympathetic neighbors pretended to believe them. In August, a Gestapo officer arrived for a routine inspection of rationing records. Marta received him in the bakery, while 5 children hid in absolute silence upstairs. The officer checked the paperwork, found everything in order, and left. That was when Marta understood. She needed a better hiding place. She couldn't keep children in a visible apartment. She needed something safer, more permanent, more ingenious. She needed to build a bunker. Building the shelter, Marta contacted Maurice Blanc, 58-year-old architect who had worked on remodeling the bakery in 1936. Maurice was part of the Communist Resistance, a clandestine network operating in occupied Paris. "I need your help," Marta said bluntly. "I need to hide children, many children. I need a space the Gestapo will never find." Maurice studied the site. The bakery occupied the ground floor of a 3-story building. The commercial oven dominated the workspace, an immense refractory brick structure that required constant coal to maintain the 250 degrees Celsius needed for perfect bread. "How many children?" Maurice asked. "I don't know. 10, 20, whoever needs refuge." Maurice measured, calculated, considered. "The cellar under the oven," he said finally. "No one searches beneath active ovens. The heat makes it seem impossible there could be habitable space." The existing cellar was a small storage area, about 3 meters by 4 meters. Maurice proposed digging deeper, creating a secondary space directly beneath the oven, then building a special refractory brick ceiling that would support the oven's weight while allowing livable space below. "The heat will be a problem," he warned. "The oven runs at 250 degrees Celsius. Even with insulation, the temperature down there will be significant." "Livable?" Marta asked. "Yes, uncomfortable but livable." "Then do it." Construction took 3 weeks in August 1942, carried out at night and on Sundays when the bakery was closed. Maurice worked with 2 resistance helpers, professional masons. They excavated an additional meter beneath the existing cellar, creating a space 2.2 meters high. They installed an ingenious ventilation system, thin ducts disguised as the oven's steam outlets, letting fresh air in while making it impossible to detect they were ventilating an inhabited space. They built a hidden entrance, a trapdoor beneath a storage shelf in the cellar, covered by flour crates. To access it, you had to move the shelving, lift the hatch, descend a wooden ladder. Once the hatch was closed from below, the space became completely invisible. Final dimensions of the shelter: 3 meters by 4 meters, 2.2 meters high. Total volume: 26 cubic meters. Estimated capacity: 15 to 20 children sitting or lying down. Maurice installed electric lighting secretly connected to the bakery system, making it appear part of normal consumption. He added basic shelving, thin mattresses, and buckets for sanitation. The most ingenious detail was the temperature. Maurice calculated that the oven's heat, even with insulation, would keep the shelter at roughly 28 to 32 degrees Celsius. Uncomfortable, but not dangerous. In winter, it would be an advantage. Free warmth with no need for detectable heating. "There's another problem," Maurice said. "Noise. The children will have to remain absolutely silent when there are customers upstairs or Nazi inspections." "We'll train them," Marta replied, simply. The total cost: 3,000 francs, about 6 months of bakery profits. Maurice refused to charge for his work, but Marta insisted on paying for materials. The money came from savings she had once planned for retirement. Retirement had become an absurd concept. Survival was the only goal. On September 1st, 1942, the shelter was complete. Marta moved the 5 children from the apartment into the space under the oven. It was hot, cramped, oppressive. But it was invisible. 2 days later, the Gestapo carried out the first major inspection of the bakery. Hauptsturmführer Weber and 3 agents searched every inch: kitchen, oven, storage cellar. Weber knocked on walls, measured spaces, searched for inconsistencies. Under the oven, 5 children remained perfectly still, sweating in 30 degrees Celsius heat, holding their breath every time they heard Nazi boots above. Weber found nothing. The shelter was engineering perfection. "Everything seems in order," he admitted at last. "But we'll be back. Something about this bakery doesn't convince me." It was a promise he would keep 11 more times. The operating system. By the end of 1942, Marta had developed a complex system to manage the shelter. It wasn't simply hiding children. It was keeping them alive, healthy and mentally stable for weeks or months until they could be evacuated to more permanent safe locations. Intake. The children arrived through a clandestine Jewish resistance network. Organizations like the Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants, OSE, identified children whose parents had been deported or who were in imminent danger, then contacted Marta through intermediaries. She never refused anyone. Documentation. Sophie kept meticulous but coded records. Each child was identified only by number. Ages, medical conditions, names of relatives, if any, were recorded in a simple code only Marta and Sophie understood. If the Gestapo seized the records, they would be useless. Daily routine. The children went down into the shelter every morning before the bakery opened at 6 a.m. They stayed there until after closing at 7 p.m. During business hours, silence was absolute. Any sound audible upstairs could betray them. Food. Marta diverted defective bread to the shelter, along with any extra food she could obtain on the black market. The children ate twice a day: breakfast before going down, dinner after coming up. Rations were limited, but more generous than what was available to Jews under occupation. Education. Sophie, who had completed lycée, taught informally at night. basic math, reading, history. The children needed to keep their minds active to avoid regression. Books came from sympathetic neighbors. Hygiene. The shelter had buckets for bodily needs. Sophie emptied them every night, disposing of the contents into the sewer system. There was no running water down there, so cleanliness was rudimentary. Illness was a constant concern. Doctors. Marta had contacted Dr. Henri Dubois, a summum local physician who sympathized. He visited irregularly, examining children showing signs of sickness. He treated minor infections with black market antibiotics. Serious cases were problems with no real solution. Mental health. This was the greatest challenge. The children had lost their families, lived in constant terror, and were confined to a narrow, hot space for 12 hours a day. Many developed nightmares, selective mutism, developmental regression. Sophie spent nights consoling them, distracting them, providing an illusion of normal life. Evacuation. The goal was always to move the children to safer locations when possible. Farms in the unoccupied zone, convents hiding Jewish children, Gentile families willing to take them temporarily. The resistance network organized transport when routes were safe. Average stay, 6 weeks. By early 1943, the system ran with incredible efficiency. Marta managed a steady flow. New children arrived as others were evacuated. At any given time, the shelter housed between 8 and 17 children, and the Gestapo kept inspecting, never finding anything. The inspections. Weber was obsessed. Every time he inspected the Keller bakery and found nothing irregular, his frustration grew. Something was wrong. It had to be. Inspection 2. November 15th, 1942. Weber arrived without warning at 3 p.m., peak customer hour. He checked coupon records, interrogated Marta about flour sources, compared inventory to recorded sales. Everything matched perfectly. Marta had falsified records with a precision professional accountants would have admired. Below, 12 children sweated in 32 degrees Celsius silence, listening to Nazi boots overhead. A 7-year-old girl desperately needed to cough. She pressed a blanket over her mouth, smothering the sound until tears ran down her face. Weber left frustrated. "I'll be back," he promised. Inspection 3, January 8th, 1943. 5:30 a.m., before the bakery opened. Weber hoped to catch early. Operations. Potentially see illegal activity before Marta could hide evidence. He found Marta and 2 bakers preparing dough, a completely normal operation. The children were still upstairs, going down only after Weber left. Inspection 4, March 3rd, 1943. Weber brought a construction specialist, an engineer who measured spaces looking for architectural inconsistencies. They measured the entire bakery and compared it to the building's original 1890 plans. The engineer noticed the cellar seemed slightly less deep than the plans indicated. There could be additional space, he suggested. Weber ordered digging. 2 agents spent 3 hours breaking up the cellar floor in the corner opposite the oven, searching for a hidden space. They found nothing because they were digging in the wrong place. Under the oven, 17 children listened to every pickaxe odor, every German curse, every speculation about where the hidden room might be. When Weber finally left, one of the older children, Michelle, 13, whispered, "I thought they'd find us. I was sure." "But they didn't," Marta said afterward, soothing him. "And they won't." Inspection 5, April 22nd, 1943. A nighttime inspection. Weber appeared at 10 p.m. with 4 agents, hoping to find clandestine activity after closing. He found Marta cleaning, Sophie reading, and 2 bakers who lived in the building preparing for overnight dough work. The children were in the shelter, where they slept each night. Weber interrogated everyone for 2 hours. Where had they been that night? Had they seen suspicious movement? Did they know Jews hiding in the neighborhood? Everyone answered with partial truths and performed ignorance. Sophie, in particular, acted brilliantly. A naive young woman with no interest in politics, just helping her widowed mother run the business. Weber left without evidence, but with heightened suspicion. Inspections 6 to 11. They continued through 1943, each more invasive than the last. Weber brought dogs once. The dogs picked up the smell of children, but Marta explained that families with children lived in the building and the smell came from upstairs. He brought sound detectors another time, but the children had been trained to absolute silence, no audible breathing. He brought a portable X-ray machine to examine the walls. The technology was too primitive to penetrate the oven's thickness. Each inspection failed. Each failure made Weber even angrier. Inspection 12, October 17, 1943. The most exhaustive. Weber arrived with 8 agents, demolition tools, and authorization to destroy property if necessary in the search for evidence. This time, he announced, we will find what you're hiding. The 12th inspection. Weber was no longer acting on instinct alone. He had new intelligence. An anonymous informant had reported that the Keller bakery was hiding Jewish children. The informant didn't know the exact location, but it confirmed Weber's suspicions. The 8 agents spread through the bakery. 2 started in the cellar, tapping walls systematically. 2 searched the apartment upstairs, interrogating Sophie aggressively. 2 examined the oven, searching for concealed spaces in the structure. 2 more combed through records looking for accounting discrepancies. In the shelter, 17 children huddled in the dark. Marta had cut the electricity when she saw the agents approaching, so they sat in total blackness. The heat was oppressive. 33 degrees Celsius, the humidity of many breaths creating a suffocating atmosphere. Upstairs, the agents were extraordinarily methodical. This wasn't a rushed raid. It was an archaeological excavation of the building, layer by layer. In the cellar, agents moved every flour crate, examining the walls and floor beneath them. They were less than 2 meters from the trap door. Sarah, now 6, and a resident of the shelter for 15 months, felt absolute panic. She had developed claustrophobia during her time underground. The heat, the darkness, the sounds of Nazis above reawakened a primal terror. She began to hyperventilate silently. Michel, the 13-year-old who had emerged as a natural leader, wrapped his arms around her, gently covered her mouth, and whispered into her ear, "I am water. You are water. We are water. No shape, no fear." It was a mantra Sophie had taught them, adapted from meditation techniques. It worked perfectly, because it had to. Upstairs, Weber interrogated Marta with an intensity that brushed against violence. "Where are the children?" "What children?" "The Jewish children you're hiding." "I'm hiding no one. I run a bakery. I bake bread. That's all." "Your production exceeds your flour allocation." "I legally purchase additional flour from authorized suppliers." A perfect lie backed by perfect forged documents. "There are rumors." "Rumors aren't evidence." Weber struck her, a slap that echoed through the bakery. Sophie screamed from upstairs and ran down the stairs. "Leave my mother alone." An agent grabbed her and held her while she struggled. "Last chance," Weber said to Marta, whose lip was bleeding. "Tell me where they are." "There's no one here," Marta repeated, her voice steady despite the pain. Weber searched for 6 hours. The agents literally dismantled sections of the bakery. They broke wooden panels, ripped out shelves, emptied the cellar completely, stacking every flour crate in the upstairs kitchen. For one terrible moment, an agent stood directly over the trapdoor. If he had struck the floor at that exact point, the hollow sound would have betrayed it. But he didn't. He took 3 steps east, struck there, and heard only the solid sound of concrete over earth. At 11:45 a.m., Weber admitted defeat. "There's nothing here," one agent reported. "Impossible," Weber insisted. "There has to be something." But there wasn't. Nothing they could detect with 1943 technology and a 1943 mindset. "If I discover you lied to me," Weber threatened Marta, "I will execute you personally." "There's nothing to discover," Marta replied calmly, even as she trembled inside. Weber left, carrying a frustration that bordered on pathological obsession. He had searched this bakery 12 times. 12 times he had failed. There would be no 13th inspection. Weber would be transferred to the Eastern Front in November 1943, where he would die in Stalingrad in February 1944. After the agents left, Marta waited 30 minutes before opening the trapdoor. 17 children emerged, sweaty, traumatized, but alive. Sarah collapsed immediately, sobbing uncontrollably. Sophie held her, rocking her like a baby. "It's okay," Sophie whispered. "You're safe. We're all safe." But no one felt safe. The terror had been too real, too close. Life underground. For the children who spent weeks or months in the shelter beneath the Keller bakery, the experience was a psychological suspension between life and death. They weren't exactly prisoners, but they weren't exactly free either. They existed in a limbo where every day was identical to the last, where the future was an abstract concept and the past was trauma they tried not to remember. Permanent residence. Some children stayed only days before being evacuated. Others remained for months when escape routes were compromised or no host families were available. The record belonged to Jean-Claude, 11, who lived in the shelter for a full 7 months between February and September 1943. It wasn't life, Jean-Claude later recalled in a 1985 testimony. It was a pause. Everything was paused. My growth, my education, my humanity. I existed in a constant state of alert, never fully relaxing because at any moment I might need to be absolutely silent, absolutely invisible. Physical adaptations. The children developed a remarkable tolerance for heat. Temperatures of 30 to 33 degrees Celsius that initially caused nausea and headaches became normal after weeks. They learned to move as little as possible to conserve energy and reduce body heat. Many lost significant weight despite adequate rations. Stress and heat suppressed appetite. Sophie watched for signs of malnutrition, supplementing diets whenever possible with black market vitamins. Social dynamics. The children formed a strange community. With ages ranging from 3 to 14, the older ones became caretakers of the younger. Michel, 13, acted like an older brother to everyone. He organized silent games, told stories, mediated disputes. The older girls, especially Rebecca, 12, who had been there 5 months, helped with the smaller children. They changed diapers for the youngest. Yes, some 3- and 4-year-olds still wore them. They comforted them through nightmares. They taught techniques for emotional survival. "We became a family," Rebecca later wrote. Not a biological family, but a family of necessity. We survived because we had each other. Loneliness would have been fatal. Clandestine education. Sophie went down every night with books, paper, pencils. She taught in whispers, math, French grammar, history, carefully edited to avoid anything too traumatic. The children craved structure, normalcy. Lessons gave them both. Some revealed surprising talents. David, 8, had a photographic memory and memorized entire poems after a single reading. Ruth, 10, was a natural artist, drawing scenes from the shelter with unsettling precision. Those drawings survived the war. They are now displayed at the Mémorial de la Shoah in Paris. Images of children pressed into darkness, faces sketched in outline, expressions of contained fear. Cumulative trauma. Not everyone adapted. One child, Philippe, 6, developed mutism after 3 weeks. He simply stopped speaking. Dr. Dubois diagnosed severe traumatic shock. Philippe was eventually evacuated to a convent where nuns specializing in traumatized children slowly helped him recover speech. 2 children developed a kind of reverse agoraphobia. When they were finally evacuated and experienced open space, they suffered panic attacks. They had been confined so long that freedom itself felt terrifying. Moments of humanity. Despite the horror, there were moments that were almost joyful. Marta brought down pastries on birthdays. Sophie organized theater performances, where the children whispered improvised plays. Once, Michelle organized Silent Olympics, in which the children competed to see who could stay silent the longest. The winner received an extra apple, an unimaginably valuable prize. The children laughed, silent laughter, bodies trembling with the effort not to make a sound. They played, games adapted to a 12 square meter space. They loved, forming deep bonds that would last decades. We promised that if we survived, we'd find each other after the war, Sarah explained in a 1979 interview. Most of us kept that promise. We reunited in Paris in 1946. It was strange seeing each other outside the shelter. We barely recognized one another in daylight. The Resistance Network. Marta's operation didn't exist in isolation. It was a node in a larger network that stretched across occupied Paris and beyond. To understand how 60 children were saved, you have to understand that network. Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants, OSE. A Jewish organization founded in 1912 to help children, OSE transformed during the occupation into a rescue machine. They identified children in danger, forged documents, arranged hiding places, coordinated evacuations. They were the ones who first contacted Marta. The couriers, young people, mostly women, who transported children between locations. The work was extraordinarily dangerous. Traveling with a Jewish child meant arrest and deportation if caught. Couriers memorized routes, contacts, cover stories. Many were captured. Many died. The forgers, a network of artists, printers, and corrupt bureaucrats producing fake identity papers. Every child evacuated from the bakery received a new set. A forged birth certificate, a forged carte d'identity, forged ration coupons. Quality varied. The best forgeries were indistinguishable from originals. The financiers. The operation cost a fortune. Black market flour, bribes to officials, payments to couriers, building materials, medicines. Money came from wealthy Jews in hiding, sympathetic Christians, international organizations channeling funds in secret. Marta never asked where the money in unmarked envelopes came from. She simply used it. The doctors, an informal network of physicians who treated children without reporting them. Legally, doctors were required to report Jewish patients. Many ignored the law, risking their licenses and their freedom. Dr. Dubois was one of roughly 50 doctors in Paris actively helping the resistance. Final destinations. The children evacuated from the bakery were sent to various places. Catholic convents hiding Jewish children, especially cloistered orders where nuns rarely interacted with the outside world. The children were falsely baptized, taught basic Catholic practice to survive inspections. Many later remembered this period with ambivalence, saved by a religious institution not their own, forced to deny their Jewish identity to live. Farms in the unoccupied South. Peasant families, some motivated by money, others by conscience, hid children as evacuated cousins or war orphans. Life was hard but comparatively safe. Neutral Switzerland, a dangerous route through the mountains. But once inside Switzerland, the children were safe. The Swiss Red Cross ran refugee camps specifically for Jewish children. They were not paradise, but they were not Auschwitz. False adoptions. Gentile French families adopted Jewish children, giving them entirely new identities. Some were reunited with surviving relatives after the war. Others stayed with adoptive families, their Jewish identities partially or completely erased. Operational security. The network operated in compartmentalized cells. Marta knew only her direct contacts in OSE. She did not know the names of other hiding places, the identities of forgers, or the locations of final destinations. If she were captured and tortured, she couldn't betray what she didn't know. That compartmentalization saved the network when cells were compromised. The Gestapo arrested multiple rescue operations between 1942 and 1944, but never discovered the full extent of the system because each node operated independently. The end of the war. By early 1944, the situation in Paris was increasingly desperate. Deportations accelerated. The Gestapo intensified searches. Resistance resources ran thin. Marta was operating at the absolute limits of physical, emotional, and financial capacity. In June 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy. Paris was still occupied, but liberation was only a matter of time. The question was, would it come in time? The Nazis, knowing they were losing, intensified final deportations, accelerated genocide, killing as many as possible before inevitable defeat. On August 19, 1944, the Paris uprising began. Resistance fighters took the streets, erected barricades, attacked German garrisons. Paris became a battlefield. On August 25th, Free French forces entered Paris. The occupation was over. Marta opened the trapdoor for the last time. 7 children emerged, the final residents of the shelter. No parents were waiting upstairs. Their families had died in Auschwitz. But they were alive. They had survived. In the following weeks, OSE worked to reunite children with any surviving relatives. Most had no one. They were placed in Jewish orphanages and eventually emigrated to Israel or the United States. Marta never sought recognition. When Nahim was done, liberation authorities asked about her role in the resistance. She answered vaguely, "I helped when I could. Many did more." It wasn't false modesty. She genuinely believed her contribution was small compared to fighters who risked their lives in direct combat. But the numbers told a different story. 63 children had passed through the shelter beneath her bakery. 61 survived the war. 2 died of illness while under her care, despite Dr. Dubois' best efforts. Survival rate, 96.8%. In a context where roughly 75% of French Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, it was a statistical miracle. Aftermath and legacy. Marta Keller died in 1978 at 79, having run the bakery until 1965, when she sold the business and retired. She never remarried. Sophie married in 1947, had 3 children, and lived until 2003. In 1965, Yad Vashem honored Marta as righteous among the nations. She traveled to Israel for the ceremony, accompanied by Sophie and 12 of the children she had saved, now adults with families of their own. "What you did," Rachel, formerly Sarah, said during the ceremony, "was give me a second chance at life. Without you, I would have died at 5. Instead, I lived. I married. I had children. My children had children. You didn't just save me. You saved generations." It was math she often repeated. 63 children saved, who collectively had about 180 children of their own, who then had about 420 grandchildren. By 2025, the descendants of the children Marta saved numbered more than 1,000 people. One act of resistance, multiplied through generations, became the permanent defeat of the Nazi goal of Jewish annihilation. The shelter beneath the bakery was preserved. New owners, aware of its history, contacted the Holocaust Museum in 1980. Historians excavated, photographed, documented. In 1985, it was declared a historic monument. Today, the space is open to visitors as part of the Mémorial de la Shoah in Paris. You can descend the stairs, step into the 26 cubic meter room, feel the residual heat of the oven, now inactive, but the structure remains. It is profoundly disturbing. The walls of the shelter are covered with names, the 63 children who spent time there. Next to each name are entry and exit dates. Next to that, the final outcome. Survived, in most cases. Died in shelter, in 2 cases. Deported after capture elsewhere, in 0 cases. That last statistic is the most remarkable. No child who passed through Marta's shelter was later captured by the Nazis. Once under her protection, they remained protected until safe evacuation. Analysis. Why it worked. Marta's operation succeeded so exceptionally for specific reasons that many other rescue attempts lacked. Perfect cover. A working bakery provided a legitimate reason for high resource consumption, constant foot traffic, and nighttime activity. Bakers typically worked nights preparing dough. A business that fed, Nazis financed the salvation of the people the Nazis intended to kill. Counterintuitive location. Hiding children beneath an active oven violated every assumption about where to search. The Gestapo expected hiding places in cold, dark, abandoned spaces, never under a structure running at 250 degrees Celsius. Superior engineering. Maurice Blanc designed a shelter that was architecturally invisible. There were no detectable inconsistencies without demolishing the oven completely, something the Nazis never considered, because the oven was essential to the legitimate business providing bread to the city. Operational discipline. Marta maintained obsessive security, coded records, compartmentalized cells, strict protocols. One mistake could have destroyed the operation. There were no mistakes. Support network. The operation worked only because it was integrated into a wider system. Marta wasn't alone. She was a node in a network of doctors, forgers, couriers, financiers. The system was resilient because it was decentralized. Personal motivation. Marta wasn't acting from abstract ideology. She acted because specific children needed specific help. That concreteness gave her a drive ideology alone could not. Luck, an undeniable factor. Weber could have discovered the shelter in any of the 12 inspections. An agent could have struck the floor above the hatch. A child could have coughed at the wrong moment. That none of those things happened was part skill, part fortune. Epilogue, the reunion. In 1995, 50 years after liberation, the shelter's survivors organized a reunion in Paris. 28 of the original 63 children were still alive. The others had died age, illness, accidents. But 28 returned. They met in the bakery, now a museum. They descended together into the shelter for the first time in decades. Some cried immediately. Others remained stoic. All fell silent, remembering. "It's smaller than I remembered," Jean-Claude observed. Now, 63. "In my memory, it was huge, but it's tiny. How did we survive here?" "We had to survive," Rachel said simply. "There was no choice." They shared stories. Some had thrived after the war, successful careers, large families, meaningful lives. Others had struggled, enduring trauma, fractured relationships, decades of therapy. Was it worth it? A journalist asked. Was it worth the trauma, the sacrifice? The question enraged Michelle. Was it worth surviving instead of dying in a gas chamber? Is that genuinely your question? The journalist apologized. "It was worth it," Rachel said calmly. "Every moment of terror was worth it because it brought us to this moment, alive, together, remembering. The Nazis tried to erase us. We exist. That is victory enough." That night, they held a dinner at a nearby restaurant. 28 survivors, plus their 87 children, plus their 143 grandchildren. 258 people whose existence depended on the fact that Marta Keller had said yes when Rachel Levy asked her to hide a 5-year-old girl just for one night. Just for one night had turned into 15 months for Sarah, 3 months for others, 7 months for Jean-Claude. Weeks, months, periods that had felt endless then, but were microscopic compared to the full lives lived afterward. The last word belongs to Sophie, speaking in 2002, a year before her death. People ask whether we were afraid. Of course we were afraid. Every day we feared we'd be discovered, arrested, executed. But fear is not a reason not to act. Fear is a reason to act carefully, intelligently, but to act. My mother understood this. She wasn't brave in the sense of being bold. She was brave in the sense of acting despite fear. That is real courage, doing what's right when every instinct screams at you to stop. The shelter beneath the oven saved 63 children. But what truly saved me was my mother's decision to say yes 63 times in a row, when no would have been safer, easier, more rational. 63 times she chose risk over safety, compassion over self-preservation. And because of that, generations exist who otherwise would never have been born. That is the lesson of the oven. Small acts of resistance, repeated consistently, defeat genocide, one life at a time. The site on Rue des Rosiers is open to visitors. You can descend into the underground space, feel the ghost heat that still seems to rise from where the oven once was. Imagine children's voices whispering in the dark. It is a small space, 26 cubic meters, but it held 63 lives, which expanded into 1,000 lives and will continue expanding as long as descendants remember. The Nazis searched the bakery 12 times. 12 times they failed. That failure, multiplied across generations, is the permanent defeat of everything they represented. An oven, a shelter, 63 children, 1,000 descendants. The Gestapo never knew, never suspected, never understood that it stood over a victory of resistance every time it inspected that bakery. And that is why, in the end, they lost